is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Tonight, reporting from Washington.
Good evening. It has happened again on Wall Street, just 8 days after what had been the largest one-day drop in the stock market in history. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has fallen more than 95 points to another record. The reason? Bad news again about the trade deficit, renewed fear about inflation, and a lot of folks who had just made their profits and decided to get out. We begin with ABC's Sandra Van Oker.
As the closing bell sounded, the day was history. A record drop exceeding the Dow's previous record loss of 91.55 points on October 7th. Trading was heavy, 207,350,000 shares. Losers outnumbered gainers 5-1. The record drop was triggered by the release of the August trade figures, which were disappointing. The U.S. trade deficit was down from $16.5 billion in July to $15.68 in August. But financial markets were expecting better figures, near $14 billion.
The dollar weakened against most major currencies, also a negative. And with the bond market down significantly, that meant short-term interest rates were up. And when short-term rates are this high, stocks just don't look attractive.
The Dow reached a record high on August 25th, 2,722.42. Since then, it's dropped nearly 310 points. Today's percentage loss was nearly 4%. The percentage loss on October 29, 1929, when the market crashed, was 13%.
There are a lot of reasons why the stock market is off, and everyone has their own theory. But one reason seems obvious. When fears of inflation push long-term yields on Treasury bonds above 10%, the people who've done well in this 5-year bull market may want to take their profits and put them in a safer place than this current roller coaster market. Sandra Van Oker, ABC News, New York.
Our second report tonight is about the economics of pro football. As of today, at least 16% of the National League players who walked are not on strike. Today, more than 100 players crossed the line so they could get this week's paycheck. ABC's Ned Parter reports that both the NFL owners and the players are trying to arrange a general back-to-work agreement, something to put all the players on the field while their representatives resume negotiations. Sources also confirmed to us the union has dropped arbitration from its demands in order to get the talks going. We have a status report on a strike, which, as you know, is all about money. Here's our business correspondent, Stephen Ogg.
They're crossing the picket lines all over the country, including some big names like Lawrence Taylor of the New York Giants. Big names or not, it's all a matter of dollars and cents.
I just got to get back in here and go to work. I only get 16 checks out of a year, so I better come in and grab as many as I can.
Players who don't cross the picket line don't get paid at all. The average pro football player is paid $231,000 a year. That's more than $14,000 a game they're not getting.
I believe if you cannot inflict pain, don't strike. And this is a case where the owners are sitting in an extremely powerful position.
And most of the owners are rich to begin with. Detroit Lions owner William Clay Ford and Washington Redskins owner Jack Kent Cooke are both said to be worth $900 million. They get most of their football money from television, which pays the football owners $2.5 billion over a 5-year period. That's about $17 million a year for each team. And NFL officials say that so far, the owners continue to receive full payments. And their expenses are down. The substitute players are being paid about 1/4 what the regulars make.
Well, the team's income has been improved as the consequence of the lowered salaries. So far as my personal income is concerned, it hasn't made a bean's bit of difference because I don't take any money.
But what could make a difference is if the television money dried up. With fewer fans watching the televised games since the strike, ratings have fallen substantially.
The advertisers are very unhappy with this because not only are they getting less available viewers, they're not getting the marquee value that they originally were paying for.
Some of the big advertisers have pulled out, at least temporarily, and the networks eventually may demand some of the money back from the owners. But if the owners and the players are able to reach an accommodation getting the regulars back on the field, everybody can go back to doing what they really want to do, making money. Stephen Ogg, ABC News, Washington.
Later in this broadcast, the press and the president. When will Mr. Reagan hold another news conference? The former hostage Charlie Glass, some insights on being held, and a little more leeway for criticism in the Soviet Union, provided you're careful.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, brought to you by Sinutab.
runny nose, watery eyes, congestion, and a headache. When you've got all these sinus symptoms all together, you've got sinus complex. And that's too complex a problem for most cold or sinus remedies. You need maximum strength Sinutab, specially developed to relieve all the symptoms of sinus complex. Sinutab, you'll feel altogether better. And take new Sinutab nighttime at night to feel altogether better in the morning.
Of all the furnaces you can buy, only one has pulse technology, the Lennox Pulse gas furnace. How good is a pulse? So good, it's backed by a lifetime limited warranty. In fact, it's so reliable, Lennox is making this warranty retroactive to every pulse ever sold.
Take it from Dave Lennox. For a lifetime of comfort and savings, get a Pulse gas furnace.
Atta boy, Dave. For home heating, you can't beat gas. America's best energy value.
President Reagan spoke to the nation today about his Supreme Court nominee, Robert Bork, but there were not many people listening at the time. As ABC's Sam Donaldson reports, it is getting harder for the president to put forward a strictly partisan view.
It was a lost cause for which the president today delivered a lost speech.
My fellow Americans, in the last 6.5 years, I've spoken with you and asked for your help many times.
But today it was different. The president wasn't speaking to many people at all. The three major commercial television networks declined to carry a mid-afternoon speech on a purely partisan subject, as the White House knew they would. So it was mainly cable news network viewers who heard the president complain that the treatment of Judge Bork has been unfair.
Unfortunately, the confirmation process became an ugly spectacle, marred by distortions and innuendos, and casting aside the normal rules of decency and honesty.
Strong words, but certainly more temperate than Mr. Reagan's off-the-cuff comment at a GOP rally yesterday that the process has been a joke. In fact, the president's last hooray for Bork's last hurrah was extremely low-key.
The purpose of the Senate debate is to allow all sides to be heard. Honorable men and women should not be afraid to change their minds based on that debate. I hope that in the days and weeks ahead, you'll let them know that the confirmation process must never again be compromised with high-pressure politics.
Low-key or not, Bork's Democratic opponents fired back.
We are tired of having our integrity impugned. We are tired of having our sincerity questioned. We are tired of having our intelligence insulted.
Cut out the temper tantrums and let the dead past bury its dead. Let's have a vote here.
On the Senate floor, the leadership tried to pin down a vote on Bork. The Democrats saying, do it now. The Republicans wanting some delay. But everything points to one by the middle of next week. So both sides are gearing up for the coming fight over the next nominee. The president asking the public to put pressure on the Democrats. The Democrats wanting to get on with it with a certain amount of thinly disguised glee. Both sides apparently having already consigned Judge Bork to the pages of history. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, the White House.
Reporters were taken somewhat by surprise today when the president indicated he would hold a news conference sometime soon. It would be only the third fully televised meeting with reporters this year. And as ABC's national correspondent John Martin reports, that has led to an obvious question. Is the White House deliberately shielding Mr. Reagan?
I think the one who can best answer that and is going to take your questions is the secretary.
Mr. President, why are these adults shouting? The answer, they say, is that they are starved for news. If Ronald Reagan does hold a press conference this month, it would be only the 41st in 81 months of his presidency, the fewest of any modern president. Richard Nixon held only 37, but that was in 66 months. Jimmy Carter, 59 in 48 months. Lyndon Johnson, 126 in 62 months. And John Kennedy, 65 news conferences in 34 months. But President Reagan has held so few that tension is growing with reporters. After a recent ceremony for teachers, a shouted question on the Bork nomination.
Mr. President, looks like the Bork nomination will fail in the committee.
You're taking away from the joy of the whole occasion for us.
We did not disturb your ceremony. Your ceremony went on. Your ceremony had ended. We wouldn't have to shout at him, and we wouldn't be shouting at him if we had regular contact with him.
At the Los Angeles Times, Bureau Chief Jack Nelson says he thinks the president cannot take the strain.
No, he's 76 years old now. He's older. He's not as fast on his feet. And he's got an awful lot of issues there.
You can't make the case that Ronald Reagan can't handle a press conference, but can handle the presidency. He's got to be able to do both.
Reagan's early affable style here in Sacramento 20 years ago has been replaced by the weight of crisis and doubt. But a magazine editor who once served as Reagan's communications director says the president owes the country some kind of weekly accounting.
We have a right to know as citizens, as journalists, what is going on inside our government. And when the government refuses to tell us, I think we have a right to stand up and say, this is wrong.
There's nothing in the First Amendment that says he has to do that, and or answer questions shouted at him at a Rose Garden event.
But other journalists say the question is at the root of democracy.
And this is one of the ways that the president makes himself accountable to the people. Now, if the people don't want that, perhaps they want a king.
Many Americans are troubled by the shouting and pestering they hear. But in the twilight of Ronald Reagan's presidency, is the question respect or access to a leader whose decisions can mean the difference between war and peace? John Martin, ABC News, Washington.
When we come back, the Persian Gulf, an Iranian challenge to a Maltese ship.
Oh, look, after 20 years, Michael loves Sarah.
You haven't changed.
I take care of myself.
And she takes Geritol Complete with nearly twice the iron of ordinary supplements.
Marry me? Again?
Geritol Complete for the best years of your life.
Another day is turned to night. Close your eyes, say goodnight.
New Sominex Liquid has a sleep ingredient doctors recommend to help you fall asleep safely without worry. New Sominex Liquid.
Good night.
Did you know the last time you starved yourself to lose fat, you might have lost muscle? Why? You didn't eat enough protein. Protein helps you keep the muscle while you lose fat. And that's what's special about Kellogg's Special K. It has the highest level of dietary protein of any cereal. So the under 200-calorie Special K breakfast may help you get the fat off and keep the muscle on. Special K. Keep the muscle, lose the fat.
Hey, do-it-yourselfers, if you could take your family on a dream vacation anywhere in America, where would you go?
Well,
how about New York, Washington, L.A.? Yes,
really
30 families will go anywhere in America when they win the Stanley Dream America contest. Win free transportation on American Airlines, rooms at Holiday Inn hotels, rental cars from Budget, and up to $1,000 worth of Stanley Tunes. Enter today. Look for this display at participating Stanley dealers. You could go anywhere, even Hawaii. Why didn't you say so?
Vindication today for John Zaccaro, the husband of the 1984 Democratic vice presidential candidate Geraldine Ferraro. A jury in New York City acquitted Mr. Zaccaro on charges of soliciting a bribe in return for a cable television franchise. There were 2 more Nobel Science Prizes awarded today. The physics prize went to Georg Bednorz of West Germany and Alex Muller of Switzerland for their work on superconductors. 2 Americans, Donald Cram and Charles Pedersen, shared the chemistry award with Jean-Marie Laine of France for work on non-toxic industrial chemicals and on new sources of energy. Speaking of energy, in the Persian Gulf today, international oil shipping continued to move, as always, subject to the whims of the various military powers assembled there. ABC's Mike Lee has been watching.
An Iranian Navy frigate today closed in to challenge the cargo of the Sea Link, an unescorted Maltese grain carrier bound for Kuwait. The unarmed Sea Link could hardly refuse, and the Iranian Navy made another uninvited visit. To merchant seamen listening in by Marine Band radio, it was like a mugging, in which the nearest policeman looked the other way. One witness was furious at a nearby British warship.
Warship, you're doing nothing.
The Iranians, satisfied that no arms were on board, eventually allowed the grain ship to proceed to Kuwait. By contrast, the Iranians today didn't dare challenge this Soviet military convoy with supplies apparently bound for Iraq. We asked a weapons expert in London to describe what he saw.
We've got a merchant ship carrying support equipment for a land battle organization, bridging equipment, hospitals, generators, of the sort that would be used in the event of some form of surface action on a land battle front.
As the Soviet Navy continues to bring military equipment into the Gulf, Western nations are trying to cope with some of the Soviet-designed hazards already in these waters.
Outside the Strait of Hormuz, the crew of a British minesweeper used a mini-sub to locate 2 apparent Iranian mines based on an old Soviet design. The British Navy later disposed of them and marked the occasion by disarming and disposing of some champagne. Mike Lee, ABC News, in the Gulf.
At the White House today, an unusual and much appreciated gesture from a visiting head of state. The president of El Salvador, Jose Napoleon Duarte, was telling President Reagan he wanted to show his appreciation for American help against leftist guerrillas in El Salvador who are fighting his government.
Permit me to go to your flag and in the name of my people to give him a kiss.
And that is exactly what President Duarte did. Mr. Reagan praised Mr. Duarte for holding talks with the rebels in an effort to bring peace to El Salvador. When we come back, talking to the former hostage, Charlie Glass.
Pete Menigen is a happy man. But then, no one has a job quite like Pete Menigen's. One where he can release his frustration, act out his aggressions, deal with his anger. Because Pete Menigen works for the world's largest retail testing laboratory at Sears, where he gets a chance to see how well things are really made, testing them to make sure they're worth every cent you pay for them, if not more, which gives him great satisfaction. So Pete never takes the office home with him.
Sorry, Mr. Minigan.
That's okay, Bobby.
Pete Menigen is a happy man, and what he does for Sears will make you happy too.
What happened to your foot?
Oh, nothing.
You probably can't name the first name in copiers, but for meeting the needs of every size business relies on the most popular copiers in America. From personal to high-performance copiers, the choice is Canon.
When your child gets a cold or an allergy, you get a lot of advice.
Give him some garlic.
You gotta sweat out a cold. A lot of advice.
Vaporize him.
But the best advice is what doctors have said millions of times. Take Dimetap. Dimetap in non-prescription formulas brings proven relief. So take the advice of doctors and pharmacists.
The garlic worked.
And take Dimetap. The best advice you can take.
For budget lodging, I call Comfort Inn at this number. For mid-priced lodging, I call Quality Inn at this number. For a luxury room at a Clarion Hotel or even suites, I call this number. Call this number and make the quality choice.
You may recall from some weeks ago how happy we all were when the ABC correspondent and colleague of ours, Charlie Glass, escaped in Lebanon. Well, Charlie, who was a hostage in Lebanon and, as we said, escaped, has been in the country this week from his normal base in London. While he was here, we tried to learn a little more through his experience, a little more about the treatment that other hostages might be getting, how it happens, and who are the type of people who actually do this sort of thing. And for the very first time, we've had a cameraman go to the area of South Beirut where Charlie and other Americans are believed to have been held. We hope the pictures make his story even clearer.
It was Wednesday morning, the 17th of June, about 10:30. And as usual, going into Beirut from the south at that time of morning, there was very heavy traffic. And all around us were the sort of garages and cheap markets and barbershops of the southern suburb. A green Mercedes pulled out of the road on the left-hand side and cut in front of us. And suddenly it stopped at a diagonal angle to us, and four men opened their doors and jumped out of the car. I turned behind me and saw that the same thing had happened behind us. Very quickly, I learned that it was a well-organized kidnapping. I was taken very deep into the southern suburbs, across the airport road, which is another road controlled by the Syrians, very close to some Syrian soldiers, and my kidnappers shot over the heads of the Syrian soldiers to keep them away. We then went into an area that was depopulated. I was led out of the car over a stretch of ground into a ruined building where it was half standing, into a filthy room that was half open to the air, made to squat on the ground. My hands were tied behind my back with cloth. Whenever I would ask for anything at first, I was told I couldn't have it. For example, when I asked for water, the guard that I spoke to said, "Why water, you deaf?"
I must tell you, Charlie, that seen from a distance, even by someone who knows the Middle East, the behavior of those who take hostages appears to be utterly medieval. The people who do kidnap foreigners, who are they?
Well, I would say that you have to break down the types of kidnapping into two groups. One is Hezbollah, Party of God, backed by Iran, kidnappings decided as a matter of deliberate policy. And those Hezbollahi are, their leadership, very devout Muslims, and their followers, for the most part, very devout Muslims, but many just paid gunmen now because the organization has grown from a very small, tightly knit group to a militia of thousands of gunmen. The second type are people who do it for money, because there is a market for Western hostages in Beirut.
Here is something I know you haven't seen before, and that is the videotape of your confession when you told the world you were, in fact, a CIA agent. Let's look at it. And will you tell us the circumstances under which it was made?
Yes, my interrogators came into my room late one evening and asked me to read a piece of paper. I said that I couldn't read this. First, because it wasn't true. Second, it was ridiculous and no one would believe it. And they said, well, you don't need to worry about that. It doesn't matter if anyone believes it. We want you to do it. And if you don't do it, you will never live to see your family. And I was told to put my head down on the table like this, to untie my blindfold, and on a given order, to look up like this and to read the statement. The statement began something like, I, Charles Glass, many of you know me as journalist, but few know the truth. I had a gun held to my head the entire time, and I was told that if I did not read that statement word for word, I would be killed.
I'd like to know a little more about the men, young men, you described them, who held you. Can you tell us any more about their character, their nature, their attitude, their mentality?
There were two types of young men who were holding me. There were my guards, who were boys between the ages of 17 and 24, who were very badly paid, about $20 a month, it was simply a job. And some of them were very friendly. Some even apologized to me for having to keep me like this. But others were sadists. Others would make me go all day without food and for long periods without water. Whenever I would make any noise, I was not allowed to speak loudly, and whenever I would move my chains around, they would tell me to stop because they didn't want the neighbors to hear. They were afraid that word might get out.
So you're suggesting that you were held, at least on one occasion, in a building where there were families living?
In all of the buildings, all of the apartment buildings where I was held, there were other families living on every floor. In one of the places where I was held, there was a family living in the apartment with me because you could hear the children talking. I could hear the mother talking to her children. They brought one of the little boys, a 3-year-old boy, in to look at me, rather like I was a pet. But I was blindfolded. I couldn't see him. I could hear just them leading their daily normal life. They just happened to have a hostage chained to a radiator in the bedroom.
Tomorrow, Charlie, on the possibility of escaping. And when we come back, the new Soviet openness and its limits.
An important message on heart attacks from the makers of Bufferin.
After 2 heart attacks and bypass surgery, I knew my life had to change direction. So I follow my doctor's advice. I'm on a regimen that includes a healthy diet, weight control, regular exercise, and taking aspirin every day.
If you've had a heart attack, only your doctor knows what's best for you. So follow his advice.
I did. And now I'm enjoying life.
Okay, honey.
Can you tell who hasn't had their Kellogg's bran flakes?
Hang in there, honey.
Well, some people feel a little sluggish if they're not eating a balanced diet.
Oh, boy, am I sluggish.
Kellogg's are the only bran flakes with fiber and a full day supply of iron to help balance your diet. And that's one great way to help fight that sluggish feeling. So maybe you can tell who hasn't had their Kellogg's bran flakes
Great shot, honey.
and who has. Kellogg's bran flakes, the fiber and iron cereal.
The new Remington Microscreen Ultimate with the exclusive beard lifter stretches the skin and lifts whiskers other shavers leave behind. The new Remington Microscreen Ultimate shaves as close as a blade and closer than any other electric shaver or your money back.
Where does it hurt?
Here.
For indigestion, heartburn, and gas, nobody does as much as Malox Plus. Dose for dose, it neutralizes more than any regular strength antacid and dissolves gas. Nobody does as much as Malox Plus.
Capital to capital.
Last time it made history. This time the topic is human rights and sparks could fly. Peter Jennings connects capital to capital at Nightline time tonight.
And finally here this evening, the Soviet experiment with glasnost. In the West, we have tended to use the word as meaning openness. We're reminded, however, that the literal translation is closer to publicity. But in the context of what is happening in the Soviet Union today, it also reflects the public airing of problems, even telling it like it is, which is rare. As ABC's Walter Rogers reports from Moscow tonight, people are talking more freely.
Well, this is, to my mind, something like fresh air in our society, you see.
It's a great freedom.
I think that glasnost is a first step towards real democracy in our society.
At Moscow University and across the Soviet Union, there is a sense things are changing, that the limits of permissible criticism are expanding. Among the top Soviet leadership, there seems to be a debate about how much debate is now okay, and the limits are not clearly defined. Russians traditionally don't like to wash their dirty linens in public. Clear limits do remain on public demonstrations. Witness this attempt by Soviet Jews today to capture attention on the Moscow-Washington satellite program on human rights to be broadcast later tonight by ABC News. Soviet authorities cut our television cables, but they were much less brutal with demonstrators than in the past. Just the same, the Western stereotype of Russians suffering in silence needs revising. One man, having to stand in line to buy vodka, wrote to a newspaper, "Why do I drink? Because everything here is vile, lies, and deceit." As free as Soviets are to complain about shabby housing, abominable medical care, and corrupt local officials, the top leadership here, the Soviet military and the KGB, remain sacred cows above public criticism.
I don't think I can say whatever I want now. I don't think that the freedom of criticism does really exist now.
There are some subjects we can't discuss. Well, there are. But I think that if we are clever people, we have this freedom.
There is little democracy. Democracy will be when our freedom will not depend upon our government.
The fact that Soviets are saying these things, which they would not have said publicly just 2 years ago, is a measure of just how far this society has come. And while this is certainly not a democracy, there is, as one student told us, clearly a process of liberalization taking place here. Walter Rogers, ABC News, Moscow.
Later this evening, at Nightline time, a live debate on human rights between members of the Congress and the Supreme Soviet. It is the second in our series we call Capital to Capital, also seen live, unedited in the Soviet Union. It is a subject which generates enormous passion, and some Soviets have actually been calling our news bureau in Moscow today to ask that we raise certain topics with the Soviet politicians they think they can't. So I hope you'll join me later this evening. That's our report on World News tonight. I'm Peter Jennings in Washington. Until later, have a good evening.